Dawn over the Solomon Islands, May 14th, 1943. The sea below is gray and slick, like the skin of something alive. 20 Japanese Zeros hang high above it, their wings flashing gold in the morning light. Down below, a single American F4F Wildcat claws for air. Engines screaming, canopy fogging over from the heat inside and the freezing thinness outside. Inside that cockpit, Lieutenant Jack "Hawk" Ferris, 24 years old, can't breathe. The gauge for his oxygen line slams against zero. His throat locks. His vision tunnels. He's at 21,000 feet, alone, and 20 enemy fighters are about to dive. Radio crackle. "Bunker Hill 1-3, where the hell are you?" I've got 20 of them, altitude 2-1, His voice cuts into static. His squadron can't reach him. His body is starving for air. He should have blacked out already. He should have died like so many others had, suffocated by his own equipment before the enemy even pulled the trigger. Instead, he reaches for the knife on his thigh. The blade flashes once. The oxygen hose hisses, and then goes silent. He's just cut the only thing keeping him alive at that altitude. And he dives. The world outside turns into a blur, blue sky folding into green jungle, jungle folding into steel sea. The Zeros scream after him, 20 silver predators falling in perfect formation. To the men listening back on the carrier, this fight should have been over in seconds. But what happens next will rewrite everything they thought they knew about air combat and about the limits of the human body. It hadn't started here, in the screaming dive. It started months earlier, with a doctrine that was killing their own men faster than the enemy ever could. The Navy called it high-altitude interception. The idea was simple: climb above the enemy, dive fast, strike first. But over the humid Pacific, that rule turned into a death sentence. The air up high was thin and freezing. Moisture turned to ice inside the oxygen regulators. Hoses cracked. Valves froze open. When that happened, the pilot never even saw it coming. He'd start breathing faster, trying to stay awake, heart pounding. Then his hands would go numb, his vision gray. And in less than a minute, gone. Just another plane spiraling into the ocean with the mask still strapped to a dead face. By early '43, the USS Bunker Hill's air group had lost 1 in 3 of its Wildcat pilots to equipment malfunction. They never even called it what it was: suffocation. Jack Ferris saw it happen to Tom Riley, his bunkmate from Kansas. Tom's last words had come through the radio. "Can't breathe. Can't," before his Wildcat spun like a coin and hit the water. No parachute, just a burst of fire and oil across the waves. A week later, Joe Duke Anders, one of their best flyers, didn't come back. His body was found still sitting upright in the cockpit, mask perfectly sealed. His oxygen line had frozen solid. The smell of burned insulation and fuel clung to his uniform all the way back to the ship. The command blamed mechanical issues. The men blamed the sky. They were told to trust the manuals, maintain altitude, follow procedure, never descend below 10,000. But those procedures were written for dry air over California, not for the wet, heavy lungs of the South Pacific. Every pilot knew it. Nobody said it. Until Ferris. He wasn't anyone special, not a medal guy, not even top of his class. He came from a wheat farm outside Wichita, a kid who'd learned to fly crop dusters before he could shave. They called him Hawk because he never flew high. He liked the ground too much, the smell of dirt, the sight of his own shadow racing over the fields. In flight school, instructors called him reckless, too low on takeoff, too fast on landing. When he joined the Bunker Hill Squadron, some of the veterans wouldn't even fly formation with him. "That kid's gonna kill himself before the Japs do." But Ferris had one thing the rule book didn't: an instinct. He felt the plane. He could sense when the engine ran rich, when the controls stiffened, when something was wrong in his oxygen line before the needle even dropped. And after Riley and Anders went down, he couldn't shake one thought. What if the system that's supposed to save us is what's killing us? At night, while others played cards or wrote letters home, Ferris sat in the maintenance bay with the mechanics. He watched them drain oil, replace hoses, scrape salt from the metal joints. He'd hold a wrench in his hand, twist a coupling, listen for the hiss. He started asking questions he wasn't supposed to ask. What if we don't climb that high? What if we fly lower, heavier air where oxygen's natural? The answers were always the same. Orders are orders. Break them, and you're grounded. Still, he kept thinking about the gauge, that tiny, trembling needle between life and death. Ferris wasn't after glory. He was after survival. He wanted to come home. He wanted all of them to come home. The night before his next patrol, he made a choice. Below deck, where the air smelled of fuel and sweat, he sneaked into his assigned Wildcat, tail number 34F7. He pulled the cockpit panel loose with a screwdriver, fingers trembling. The metal was slick with condensation. Every sound, the click of tools, the hiss of steam, echoed off the steel walls. One wrong move and the sentry would catch him. Court-martial. End of career. Maybe even a cell. But Ferris kept going. He traced the oxygen line from the regulator to the cockpit port, saw the frost collecting at the coupling. That's where Riley's had failed. That's where Anders's had jammed. He disconnected it. Then he rerouted the feed valve to vent outside the fuselage when the cockpit altitude hit 10,000. Below that, he'd rely only on what nature gave him. Pure, hot air. Sweat dripped into his eyes. He could taste it. He wiped his hands on his flight jacket, muttering under his breath, "Better to breathe real air than die sucking metal." When he finished, he tightened the panel, checked the dials, and sat there in the dark. The deck groaned. The smell of oil filled his lungs. He waited for fear to catch up, but it never came. Just a strange calm, like he'd already accepted whatever came next. The next morning, the sky looked clean, harmless, like a painting. The carrier's deck crews waved him off. Nobody knew his oxygen system was gone. He took off in formation, holding steady at 15,000 feet. Then the radar call came. 20 bogies inbound from the northwest. They were Zeros, fast and climbing, looking for bombers. "Bunker Hill Squadron, intercept at 21,000, came the radio. Standard procedure. Deadly procedure. Ferris hesitated. His hand brushed the oxygen mask hanging from its hook. He thought of Riley's last breath, of Anders's frozen body. Then, he did the unthinkable. He threw the mask over his shoulder. He cut the line. The hiss stopped. The cockpit filled with silence. And as the others climbed, Ferris dove, alone, into the thick air where the sea heat rose like breath. Above him, 20 Zeros peeled down to chase. The Wildcat shudders as it drops through the clouds. Moist air slams against the wings, dense and heavy like syrup. The altimeter spins. 10,000. 7. 5. The engine growls deeper. Ferris feels it, the plane breathing again. Above him, the Zeros dive in perfect arcs, their white vapor trails slicing the blue. They're faster, lighter, designed to dance at high altitude. Down here, though, the air turns against them. He sees the first Zero overshoot, its wingtips wobbling in the humidity. Ferris pulls hard left, so low he can see his shadow racing across the jungle canopy. The wings groan. G-force pins him to the seat. His vision goes gray. Come on, come on. Hold together, girl. He grunts through clenched teeth. Bullets tear through the air behind him, the sound like tearing canvas. He jerks the stick and the Wildcat rolls into the clouds, rain streaking the canopy. Inside that mist, the cockpit becomes a coffin, claustrophobic, white, shaking. He can smell the engine oil burning, feel the vibration through the pedals. The radio explodes in static. "Ferris, you're out of position. Gain altitude. Repeat, gain..." He cuts it off. There's no time, no oxygen, no turning back. He slams the throttle forward. The plane trembles like it might split apart. At 2,000 feet, the air turns wet and alive. He can finally breathe, deep, burning gulps of real air. He's sweating through his flight suit, but the dizziness is gone. The numbness in his fingers fades. Now it's just him, the stick, and 20 predators hunting through cloud and sun. A silver shape flashes past the canopy, a Zero banking hard, red circle bright on its wing. Ferris flips inverted, rolling under the enemy's belly. He squeezes the trigger. 50 caliber rounds rip through the air, the smell of cordite filling his nose. A line of sparks chews across the Zero's fuselage. Its engine coughs, then bursts into flame. The pilot bails too late. A flash of white silk vanishes into the trees. "That's one," Ferris mutters. But there's no time to celebrate. 2 more are already diving on him. He jerks into a valley, the walls of green rising on both sides. Branches whip the wings, mud sprays from the prop wash. A Zero follows too close, its propeller slicing through mist, too fast for this thick air. Ferris drops the throttle, letting the heavier Wildcat stall just long enough. The Japanese fighter shoots past, and in that half-second window, Ferris fires again. The rounds shred the Zero's tail. It tumbles, hits a tree line, and vanishes in a bloom of fire. 2 down, he says to himself, breathing hard. 18 to go. His body screams from the strain. Muscles twitch, heart hammering. Sweat burns his eyes. Another Zero slides into view on his right flank. He jerks the stick, but too late. Tracers slice past his wing. One hits the fuselage, punching a hole near the cockpit. Hydraulic fluid sprays, hot and stinging, across his face. Ferris wipes it away with his sleeve, eyes burning. He can taste metal and oil. He banks into the ocean spray, the horizon tilting wildly. Now the Zeros are trying something new, splitting into groups, one high, one low. They've realized something's wrong. Their engines are choking, their tight turns failing. Down here, their wings bite too deep into the wet air. They can't match his rolls. Ferris can feel it, the shift, the panic. He dives lower, so low his prop wash skims the waves. One Zero follows too steep, tries to pull up, but its engine floods. It clips the water and explodes, shattering into flaming fragments that scatter across the surf. 3, Ferris says, voice flat, like he's counting fence posts back home. He climbs, punches through a thin cloud bank, and suddenly the sky is full of them. Zeros everywhere. Tracers cross in every direction. The air glows red and gold. Ferris yanks the stick sideways, wings creaking. He squeezes the trigger again, bursts in 2-second intervals to keep the guns cool. One Zero takes a burst across the cockpit and peels away, trailing smoke. Then another gets caught in the turbulence from a diving comrade. The 2 collide in a flash of fire. He doesn't even count that one. It's chaos now, too fast to think, only instinct. A duel of physics, sweat, and breath. Minutes blur into seconds. Ferris is still alive, somehow. Down here, every gust of wind feels like a hand trying to flip him. The altimeter dances between 1,000 and 500 feet. A Zero dives straight at him head-on. He doesn't dodge, he holds the line. The 2 planes streak toward each other, the distance closing at 500 miles per hour. At the last instant, Ferris drops under, flips upside down, and fires through his own turn. Bullets rip through the Zero's belly as it passes overhead. It explodes mid-air, debris raining down around him. The cockpit fills with heat and smoke. He coughs, wipes his eyes, keeps flying. For 10 straight minutes the fight rages, a blur of jungle, water, fire, and cloud. When he finally breaks free, only 7 Zeros remain in the sky. They pull back, forming up in the distance, unwilling to chase any lower. Ferris circles once, scanning. 3 burning wrecks below, 2 floating chutes, and behind him, nothing but the smell of cordite and hot engine oil. He's alive. He's won. He doesn't radio for praise. He just climbs slowly, breath still ragged. His mask dangles uselessly by his knee, the hose cut clean through. When he lands back on the bunker hill, the deck crews swarm his plane. They stare at the bullet holes, the scorched fuselage, the empty oxygen port. "What the hell happened to your line, Hawk?" "Cut it," he says simply. They think he's joking. He isn't. He tells them what he did, what he felt down there, how the Zeros struggled in the thick air. At first, nobody believes him. Then the gunnery cameras come in, grainy footage showing Zeros stalling, twisting, colliding. Word spreads across the squadron like wildfire. The kid went low and lived. The humidity trick. The guy who cut his line. Within a week, other pilots start trying it, flying lower, heavier, faster in the soup air. Their kill ratios jump. Their losses drop. The flight surgeons start noticing fewer cases of hypoxia. Mechanics start leaving oxygen couplings just a little looser, unofficially. And the Navy's doctrine quietly changes. Recommended altitude? Flexible based on weather conditions. No mention of Ferris. No note in the manual. Just a silent shift. But the enemy notices too. Japanese interceptors begin reporting erratic American behavior. They call it the mad dive, the tactic that pulls them into air too thick for their carburetors to handle. Commanders try to warn their pilots. Do not chase below 5,000 feet. You will lose control. But by then it's too late. The shift has already happened. The Americans are surviving. The Zeros are not. The Pacific sky, once their hunting ground, has turned against them. By late 1943, the Bunker Hill Air Group's fatality rate drops by nearly half. The low-altitude fighting style spreads across the fleet. Nobody calls it the Ferris maneuver. They call it environmental adaptation. But every man who'd ever flown with him knows. After that mission, Lieutenant Jack Ferris didn't say much. He walked off the flight deck still soaked in sweat and handed his sidearm to the crew chief. His hand was shaking, not from fear, but from the oxygen deprivation still fading from his blood. The chief just stared. "You really cut it, sir?" Ferris nodded. "If I hadn't, you'd be fishing me out of the sea." The men laughed nervously, unsure if he was a lunatic or a genius. But that night, no one slept. Word had traveled fast. The pilot who survived 20 Zeros by diving into air thick enough to breathe. One mechanic, Reggie Hall, his old bunkmate, wrote in his log, "Ferris came back coughing up blood and victory. Told me the air down low saved him. Said he could feel the plane again. Said the Zeros couldn't turn where the air was real." The next morning, the other pilots tried it. Not cutting their lines, not yet, but testing the limits. Flying below the clouds, trimming the flaps differently, chasing the fight downward. And the impossible started happening. They were winning. Over the following months, those reckless pilots turned the doctrine inside out. The Navy's own reports showed something they couldn't ignore. kill ratios shifting from 1 to 3 losses to 3 to 1 victories. The change wasn't written down, it wasn't briefed, but in the humid corridors of the Pacific, pilots whispered about it like a superstition. Low and wet keeps you alive. The physics made no sense on paper, but it worked. The Zero's engine, so perfect at high altitude, choked on dense air. Its wings lost that eerie lift advantage. The Wildcat, heavier and slower, finally had its fight. And in that strange reversal, the underdog plane, the flying coffin, became a predator. But nobody wrote Ferris's name in the manual. Officially, his oxygen line was damaged during combat. Unofficially, he'd shown every pilot in the fleet a way to breathe again and live. By early 1944, new planes like the Hellcat arrived. Faster, stronger, better systems. The old Wildcats were phased out. The stories from the early days turned into barroom tales, legends that half the new kids didn't believe, but some remembered. Reggie Hall, the mechanic who'd covered for Ferris that night, still carried a small piece of that severed oxygen hose in his locker. Lucky charm, he called it. He said when the engines roared for takeoff, he'd touch it once, for luck and for loyalty. The war ended in August 1945. The Pacific went quiet again. Ferris didn't go home to parades or medals. He went back to Kansas, bought a single-engine crop duster and started flying over wheat fields. Low, always low. The same horizon, the same hum of wind through metal, the same smell of earth and oil. Neighbors said he flew like he was part of the land, always skimming the ground just a few feet above the stalks. If anyone asked why, he'd just smile and say, "I breathe better down here." He never talked about the war, never told the story of the dive or the oxygen line or the day 20 Zeros couldn't kill him. Maybe he didn't think it mattered. Maybe he didn't want credit for something that had cost so many lives to learn. Years later, when Reggie Hall visited him in Wichita, he brought a small box. Inside was that same piece of hose, cracked, faded, still faintly smelling of rubber and sweat. He placed it on Ferris's workbench. "Thought you ought to have it," he said. Ferris ran his thumb along the edge, the same way he'd done on that night below deck. "You kept it all this time?" Someone had to remember. Ferris just smiled. "You were there. That's enough." They drank beer until sunset, two men who'd cheated death in the Pacific sky. When Reggie left, he looked back once. Ferris was sitting in his chair, staring at the horizon, as if listening for engines that no longer flew. Ferris passed away quietly in 1983, age 64. No children, no military honors beyond a service ribbon. His flight logs were never archived. His modified regulator, the one he'd tampered with that night, was scrapped long before anyone realized what it meant. But among the surviving Bunker Hill pilots, the name still carried weight. They'd say, "That low air trick saved my hide." Then someone else would nod and add, "Yeah, Ferris figured it first." It wasn't written in the Navy records. It wasn't carved on any monument. But it lived in the quiet space between breath and survival, between the rules and the instincts that kept them alive. There's a story some of the deck crew told long after the war. A few years before he died, Ferris visited a small air museum in Pensacola. In the corner of the hangar sat a Wildcat, rusted, stripped, but still proud. He climbed the rope barrier and ran his fingers along the cockpit frame. Then he saw it, a length of oxygen tubing still coiled behind the pilot's seat. He smiled, whispered something only the plane could hear, and walked away. The curator later found a note left under the seat cushion. It said, "She didn't need this where we were going." Today, the manuals never mention him. The history books don't either.
But the tactics he proved in those 10 impossible minutes reshaped the air war over the Pacific. Every dive that followed, every low pass, every desperate pull in the humid air, traces back to a kid from Kansas who refused to suffocate quietly. He broke the rules not to be a hero, but to give his brothers a chance to breathe. And that's why his story still matters. Because in a war of machinery and doctrine, one man's raw instinct turned survival into a rebellion. If you ever find yourself standing near an old Wildcat in a museum, look inside the cockpit. Find the oxygen line. Run your hand along it. Somewhere, maybe, there's still a faint scratch mark from a knife blade, made by a man who decided to breathe real air one last time. Because sometimes, victory isn't in the medals or the manuals. It's in the moment someone chooses to live, even when the rules say they shouldn't. If this story hit you the way it hit us, tap like so more people hear it. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Our audience runs from small-town mechanics to history teachers. And make sure you're subscribed so these names don't disappear.